talking about fossil fuels, right? And so basically I want to go from how do we get from the energy that comes from the sunlight, how do we get from there to the energy, turning that into energy that we produce, right? One of the keys is that in how I just described it, right? I just talked about, basically we're going to talk about what are fossil fuels and where do they come from? How do they get created? But listen to how I'm describing that. What am I calling that? I'm calling coal, and I'm calling oil, and I'm calling gas fossil fuels. Excellent. Everybody seen the sign-up sheet? You can see me if you... Anybody who's not here, let me know. Right? Coal, some of you are awake, right? Coal, oil, and gas. I'm calling them fossil fuels. It's what we call them. Right? There is an author who... Tom Hartman, who has written this book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is a tremendous book. If you're a scientist, if you're not a scientist, it's a really great book. And he basically is talking about climate change and how we use fossil fuels and how we can move from our dependence on fossil fuels. He makes the argument that just in the way that we talk about it, already makes the outcome inevitable. By saying fossil fuels to describe what I'm about to just describe, we're already saying that this stuff is, this sunlight, this energy, these energy deposits are basically, can only be used as fuel for us to use. We're already determining the outcome of what this stuff is and how it is to be used. And in relation to how useful it is to us. Stay with me for a moment and let me explain what I'm saying. Tom Hartman would describe coal and gas and oil as ancient sunlight, not calling them fossil fuels. Because quickly, this is what happens. The sun shines. There are plants. What do plants do that humans can't do, that animals can't do? Plants can make their own food. So plants use the sunlight, exactly, and they use, what else? CO2. Right. And so they use the carbon dioxide, and in the presence of sunlight, they use that to split the oxygen off of the carbon, and then to use the carbon to make simple sugars, right? And then what do they do with the oxygen? They give off the oxygen, right? So that whole process, Tom Hartman describes as capturing sunlight, right? This has been happening for millions and millions of years. Somewhere around 350 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, and I'm going to write that down just because I want you to pay attention to how it's spelled. Do you notice anything about the way this word is spelled? Carbon. Right? So this word, this Carboniferous comes from an Old English word that came about somewhere. I don't know, 15th century. Anyway, what it does is it defines this whole period on carbon, which we then use for energy. So again, the whole period of time, the whole geologic period of time I'm about to describe, we have named after sunlight. So what if we called coal, instead of calling it a fossil fuel, what if we called it ancient sunlight? Would we have the same predisposition to how we used it? Right? I don't know if the answer is I don't know if we would use it any differently. I'm just asking the question. Because we don't ask the questions. We assume that coal is a fossil fuel, and since that's how everybody describes it, and we're just going to call it that, and we're never going to think about what it means to call it that, or how we ever got to the place where we started calling it that to begin with. Do you get where I'm going with this? So it's sort of the similar situation with oil, except with what you have with oil is that's starting in the oceans. You have the tiny microscopic plants called algae, which are doing the same thing the plants on land are doing. They're photosynthesizing, so they're capturing the sunlight, and they're taking up nutrients in the water, and then they're floating all around in the ocean. Lots of sunlight, more and more plants. At some point they die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean, and they start to pile up in a layer down here at the bottom of the ocean. Over millions and millions of years, that continues to happen, so you're having dead organic matter, different layers of it on top of each other, again with enough heat and enough pressure, and with geologic eruptions at the bottom of the ocean too. That's adding that pressure, and it's compacting it all down, and that's basically turning these layers of ancient plants, these layers of ancient sunlight, into deposits that we recognize and that we now call oil. So that's how we get coal, that's how we get oil. It's basically dead organic matter, dead plants that under enough time, with enough heat and enough pressure, get broken down into a carbon form that we now recognize as fossil fuel. Right? What calling it ancient sunlight does, it just challenges the assumption that coal and oil are things that have always been here, and it challenges the assumption that they are things that are only useful in relation to how we have classified them or what we need them for, that they are only useful based on how they meet our needs. This is a really ridiculously simplified timeline based on some of the conversation and some of the dates that are going to be in your study guide. So if you have when the universe was formed, if you have when the earth was formed, here's this Carboniferous period that I'm talking about. Just stay with me for a couple of moments, because this is where the earth is capturing this ancient sunlight. Right? These plants are capturing the sunlight and turning that into fuel. As animals come on the scene, animals are then eating those plants, right? So those animals are able to capture that sunlight, able to capture that energy by eating the thing that has captured the sunlight. And then other animals come along, and those animals start eating the animals that ate the plants. And those animals are capturing the energy that the animals who captured the energy from the plants got, right? So you see how this is going, right? You see how this works. And then humans come on the scene. And what do humans do? We can either eat the plants or we can eat the animals, and that's how we capture the energy, either directly from the plants or from the animals. But there's a limiting factor. There's only as much food as there are plants and animals to eat. And once there aren't plants or animals to eat, then that population can't be supported anymore. Right? So how much food is available limits how many people there are on the planet. Until you get to around 40,000 years ago. And that's when people started, and we talked about this earlier, to domesticate cattle, right? Start to domesticate livestock. And we realized, hey, if we cut down some of the plants and have a big field where we can put cattle, where we can put a bunch of cows, we can have more cows than we need to eat at the moment, but they can keep eating the plants, they can keep ingesting energy, and then when we need energy, when we need more food, we can kill cows and eat them, but we can sort of stockpile our energy. So now we go from having captured energy to having what the author calls is the stored energy. And basically that's what the animals are. He's describing that as stored energy. And now we can manipulate the system, because now we can start to have more people because we're able to stockpile food. So populations start to increase. Then around 10,000 years ago, that's when we really start, that's when humans really start with agriculture that we would recognize as agriculture. Hey, we see that there are certain plants growing. We can grow these plants on purpose in a particular area, and we can do things to make them grow more and to make them grow at different times of the year, right? We can add water, we can do things to them to make them grow more. And by having more food available, that means a larger population can be sustained. So it's really around this point that we start to manipulate how much food is available on the planet, which allows populations to go up. Is this a conscious decision? No, right? But you see where I'm going with this. Then if you fast forward, so this is a sort of a pivotal time right here in human development and human evolution, in the evolution of society, civilization, right here. Fast forward, and what we're going to talk about during this session is then where we really see the next, not the next, but another really big tipping point, where during the 15th through 17th centuries we have the age of exploration and the discovery of the New World, right? And what that does to population and population expansion and the need for resources, and so therefore the drive to be able to harness these resources. And then we move into industrialization, and then we move into this rapid industrialization, and now we move into globalization. All the while, what is happening is that this ancient sunlight that started 300 million years ago, we need more and more and more of it to be able to build bigger and better things and to be able to move farther and farther around the planet. And as we increase all of our resources, our access to resources, that's driving up, that means populations can increase, right? But then that also, what does that mean? It's a feedback loop, right? That more energy has got to go into the system. So we have more resources, so we're able to do more things, but that means we do more things, so now we need more resources to keep all those things going, all the while population is expanding.
A question of scale on the chart.
Ridiculously no scale to it.
Okay, but if we were going to take the bottom part, how would that fit on the top chart? Just a minuscule amount?
Yes.
Barely?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's an important point maybe to raise to people.
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't make it fit all that way without it being a little bit more confusing. So yes, this is like, right, if I had like a line sort of right here, that one little line would be this whole piece right here.
Right, which is everything we've used basically.
Exactly. Exactly. This were a 24-hour clock, right? This would be the last second, maybe. If the 24 hours is all of geologic time, this little part down here would be maybe a second. That long. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Thank you for helping clarify that scale. All right. So that's where we are to start our conversation. And we're going to start by looking at, in your study guides, the happiness machine.